Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name's Rob Franco. I am the lead program manager for Internet Explorer 7 security. First of all, again, it's the afternoon. I appreciate folks coming. Today we want to talk about how Internet Explorer helps protect the system, why we have to protect the system, and how to make sure that your sites are going to work well with Internet Explorer 7. When we went through this talk a couple of times today, Tony Shore, the GPM of IE, said, wow, you know, actually, Internet Explorer 7 isn't, going to be necessarily that big of an impact for a lot of sites. There are going to be a lot of sites that are just going to work. So one of the things that I hope that folks take away from today is the extent of the work that we've done to make sure that we're compatible and some of the important gotchas that you still have to be aware of in order to continue working. So I'm going to dive right in. In order to look at some of the features, we're actually going to use the compatibility toolkit. This is a separate app that we've written. What this does is it looks at a log file. So every time we hit one of the security features in IE7, this kit is going to be able to detect the change that we hit and show it to us. OK, so here we go. We're going to run it. It's going to take a second. All right. This kit has a couple of bugs. It's very new, so you're going to see some noise in it. But what I want to show you is how to use it in a high level. So before we get started here, I want to tell you a little bit about my goal. My goal with IE7 is to protect the system against one of the most dangerous forces on the internet today. And specifically, what I'm talking about is my brother. My brother is not like Dean's brother that you heard about yesterday at the keynote. My brother expects to get everything online for free. He's willing to go anywhere and download just about anything in order to get that stuff. So what happens after he's done that? Who's his favorite brother? Me. He calls me up and says, hey, the machine's toast. I can't get to the sites. I have trouble. I'm having trouble connecting. I've got stuff on my system. What do I do? Well, this is for him, and this is for all of those other brothers that we have in our lives who go out and find themselves in situations like that. So first we're going to talk about the ways that IE7 helps protect the system. So here I am. I'm about to be lured off to a site that is going to try to get malware installed on my system. And pardon me while the man behind the curtain hits the magic keys to make it all work. OK, here we go. So when I go to this site, the first thing you notice is that IE7 is showing this information bar. And what that means is that IE7 has blocked the site from using an ActiveX control. Now, you've seen this information bar before in other versions of IE. But this information bar actually means something different. This means that the site's been blocked from using an ActiveX control that was already on the user's system. And the problem with this particular ActiveX control that the site's going to try to use is that this ActiveX control has a vulnerability. Now, it's not a real ActiveX control that would be on anyone's system. It's one that we built for the purposes of the demo. But you can imagine that a malicious site would try to use an ActiveX control that's already on the user's system to try to use that to get malware on the system. So my brother, he's been to this site. And let's actually take a look and see what the site would actually be trying to do. So here you can see that the site's going to try to write a local file to my brother's start folder. And after he reboots the next time, the system's going to be taken over by that exe. OK, so my brother, bound and determined to get his free stuff, is actually going to run this ActiveX control. And because he's run this ActiveX control now, the site's going to try and take advantage of that vulnerability. So when we go to the startup folder, we would expect to see that the bad stuff was there. But when we go to the startup folder, actually, it's empty. So what's happening? Well, Internet Explorer is running in protected mode. And that means that it's been physically restricted so that it doesn't have the permissions to write into the startup folder. And what happened instead is that write got redirected down into a subfolder of the temporary internet files folder. And you can see here underneath the temporary internet files folder, we went and created that path, and we created a folder so that the exe, if it had been a legitimate one, could have been written into a place where an extension could go get it later. Now, because it's been written by Internet Explorer in protected mode, that means that even if a user went and found this exe, even if they knew where it was, it would still be written with the same protections and the same restrictions that IE had when it wrote it. Okay, so now that I've kind of showed you how that exe got there, when it's running in the temporary internet files folder, can you see how that has kind of neutralized the threat? Can you see how that prevents that exe from ever getting out and trying to take over the system? It's never going to be able to start automatically. And even if it were able to start, it wouldn't be able to elevate its privilege to do anything malicious. Okay, so let's assume that we get called over to the house, and we have to go and help clean up a system like this. Well, one of the things we've done is we made it easy in IE7 to delete the browsing history. So I'm going to actually go ahead and clear out everything in the system. And you can see how IE clearing out its temporary internet files folder has kind of removed that malicious file from my temporary internet files folder. Okay, so now that I've shown you the product in action, I want to take a closer look at exactly what happened. So we talked about ActiveX controls. And I want to show you the history of ActiveX and where we've ended up. And you can see with IE6, you remember that in the old days, you'd go to a site, and it would throw a bunch of pop-up windows with advertisements, but it would also throw a bunch of prompts that encourage folks to download maybe a new ActiveX control with a toolbar and maybe some other code, some stuff that the user didn't necessarily want. So what we did in XPSP2 is we added that information bar. That's the first time you saw it used. Adding the information bar in XPSP2 actually made a big impact against sites that were able to kind of coerce users into installing something that the end user didn't really want. So that already kind of helped raise people's trust and raise people's confidence about browsing around, because they knew if they ended up on a site that they weren't going to be kind of coerced into installing something. But we know that we can make ActiveX even safer, because there's ActiveX controls that are already on the system that a developer may have written 5 or 6 years ago. And maybe that ActiveX control is sitting around, and like the one that I used in the demo, maybe it's got a vulnerability. By disabling ActiveX controls by default, that vulnerability gets neutralized, and it can't be used against the end user. And really what you see here is that the end user is in control of their system. They're in control of the ActiveX that's a part of their browsing experience, and that means that they have less potential risk. Windows Vista adds an additional layer yet, because in Windows Vista, end users are going to run as restricted users by default. The administrator tokens are taken away from their token when they're browsing. So there's an additional confirmation that says, hey, what you're about to do is going to require administrative privileges. Do you want to allow this admin rights action? So what that does is, again, it helps put the end user in control of the ActiveX controls in their system. And at the same time, IE's been built with a set of defaults that are going to work for most websites. So for example, the most common ActiveX controls on the web today, Flash and PDF and the Real Player and the Sun JVM and the Windows Media Player, all of those ActiveX controls, because of how commonly they're used, those we've actually set to enabled by default. And as any developer who has an ActiveX control that they need to enable for a particular scenario, you can actually go and write the registry key to enable that in an end user system. It's a very simple reg key to write. If you're a site and you need an end user to be able to use a control, you could encourage the end user to use the information bar in the same way that my brother did to let the bad code run in his system. Obviously, you wouldn't be encouraging them to run bad code. So the next thing I want to talk about is the protected mode demo. We saw protected mode in action. We saw that protected mode stopped the file from being written to the startup folder. So let's take a look and see what happens under normal circumstances with IE or really any application running on the system if the end user has full privileges. So obviously, if the end user has admin rights on the system, the application can do anything that the end user can do. You can imagine that if there's a vulnerability, that vulnerability can be used to install some malware in the user system. Even in the user rights section of the file system, there are places like the user startup folder. So even if I run as a regular user, I might have a potential for a vulnerability attacking my system. Now, this is an important way that we've changed the game in Windows Vista. And protected mode is a feature that's a part of Windows Vista because of the idea of integrity control. So integrity control is the kind of rights management that we've used to restrict IE and restrict it so that it can only write into the temporary Internet Files folder by default. So for most websites, this is going to work fine because a website is simply writing writing cookies. It's caching files on the system, and there's no impact. That's what IE is for. It's for rendering sites, amongst other things. But that's the most common activity. So what happens if the end user wants to save something on their system? Obviously, IE doesn't have the privileges to do that. So we've built a separate process that actually is able to listen to requests from IE. And when the user wants to save something, the broker process shows a prompt to the user, the same prompt they've seen before, and confirms that they're actually taking an action they want to take. And then a separate one also for installing ActiveX controls. But it's all transparent to the end user. They don't have to get involved, and they don't have to see anything. Then imagine you've written a toolbar. You've written a search toolbar that's running inside of the IE process, and you want to save your settings. You want to record the places that you've helped the user search. Well, obviously, a toolbar wouldn't necessarily have the privileges to write into HKCU on the system if it's running inside of the IE process where IE's been restricted. So what we did is we built a compatibility shim that takes those rights and stores them in that redirected kind of virtualized location under the temporary Internet Files folder. So when the ActiveX control in the attack wrote evil.exe, the reason that it went into the temporary Internet Files folder is because, for compatibility reasons, we're redirecting things down to the temporary Internet Files folder. So does that make sense? Do people understand kind of the ways that this is kind of neutralizing the threat and how we're trying to balance compatibility? OK. So just a quick look here. I want to go and actually take a look at some of those other extensions running in place. You can see here is a very rich Flash experience still running as expected. Here's a site. Let's say my brother, he needs a new machine because the last one's toast. So he's going to go and go shopping. I'm definitely not giving him mine, that's for sure. And you can see here, IE in protected mode, hosting PDFs, working exactly as expected. And this actually reflects a great deal of collaboration between the IE team and the engineering teams at Adobe and the Flash team, which is now also part of Adobe. And we've worked extensively with the Real Player team, with folks from Yahoo, with folks from AOL, with folks from Google. And we're seeing that it's very possible for folks who have extensions to be compatible with protected mode IE by taking advantage of some of the compatibility mitigations that we've built. So with regard to compatibility and these protections for the system, one of the issues that we see come up commonly is that folks use the MSXML 5.0 control. And this is an example where the ActiveX control is disabled. It's off by default. It's not one of the controls that's been enabled. So because this is using MSXML 5.0, the site's not able to use it, and the end user is going to see the information bar. But there's a better option. IE7 includes a native XML HTTP object. So you can use the same XML HTTP object that you're using in other browsers. And if that's not available, if you are falling back to an IE5 or an IE6 experience, you can use this prog ID, just the XML HTTP prog ID, to get the right version of XML HTTP for the version of the client that you're on. So we've seen the site is trying to attack my poor brother over and over again, and the poor guy is just, you know, whatever the site asks him to do, he'll do it. So let's imagine that, go back. Now we know that protected mode is going to protect against a vulnerability and the code kind of using privilege to install itself on the end user system. But one thing that protected mode doesn't protect against is an end user deciding on their own to install something. And this is where we're going to start looking at the idea of how IE protects also the system. In addition to helping protect also the user. We talked about how IE protects the system before and protects the system from vulnerabilities being used against the user. This is going to be an example of where IE starts to protect the user. Okay. So my brother, again, deciding he wants to run anything this site's got for him. It's unsigned. It's got an evil-sounding name. Well, here what you saw is Windows Defender actually, before IE ran the file, Windows Defender came along and scanned the exe and detected that this was a piece of malware. This was a known malicious file. So because Windows Defender was able to stop this file before it runs, you can see that the end user's been protected. And this is actually a protection that any anti-spyware scanner can participate in. So Symantec is another example of an anti-spyware scanner that's able to intercept those malware files before they run on the end user system. Now, I want to shift away from my brother, who has now, we've now neutralized the threat of my brother, and I want to talk about my poor mom. My poor mom, she's heard about all this stuff, and every time she looks at the PC, there's a problem because of the stuff my brother's been doing. She hears me come home and talk about the phishing problems, and she doesn't know what to think. Well, this is a scenario where we've built some protections in for folks who don't have that confidence, that daring, bold confidence that folks like my brother have. So here, I'm going to go out to an email. It's taking me to a site. There's some things going on with the site. OK, we all recognize what that email was. It was a fake email. We see that when I got to the site, we saw it was trying to collect information. Now, what you see is that Internet Explorer noticed that this was a potentially malicious site, looked at its list of known good sites that are already on the system, wasn't there. The heuristics say, hey, there are some suspicious things going on. At that point, Internet Explorer calls out to a web service, urs.microsoft.com, and urs.microsoft.com comes back and says, yep, this is a site that human site graders have determined is actually committing a phishing attack against end users. So because we were able to send that warning back, we were actually able to navigate the user away from the site and prevent that site from doing something malicious to my poor mom. Well, there are obviously, if we knew about all the bad, all the sites doing crime, there would be no crime and things would just be OK. But we know that there are going to be sites that are going to also try to collect information where we haven't tracked them down yet. And this is an example where IE suspects that something is going on with the site, but the web service doesn't know about the site. So the web service comes back and says, don't know. IE then warns the user to proceed with caution by showing them the yellow address bar. And the thing that you can see here, a couple of key things to note. The site is collecting information. It's not over HTTPS. It's over an IP address. And those are just a couple of things that kind of weigh into this. And we're going to talk about how to make sure that that we work with the phishing filter and that our sites don't get flagged. So let's actually now. This was a real phishing site, and let's come over to a site I'm putting together. My brother, despite his problems with computer security, is getting married. And I've been contracted to put together the official wedding website. So I've got this site, and I want to give them a secure login because I'm a security guy. And when we go to the site, the first thing we see is a certificate error. My mom says, hey, you told me to watch out for stuff like this. Well, what's going on here is that the certificate that I got for their site is for johnandtalia.com, not for that IP address. In previous versions of IE, we threw up a warning, and the end users clicked through the warning. In IE7, we're going to throw a stronger warning because IE7 has to make sure that the user's taking the right default security actions. Now, let's go ahead and look at, this is the RSVP site. OK, here again, my mom says, listen, this is a suspicious site. You know, I thought this is the site you were putting together for the wedding. I say, sorry, Mom, I sent you the wrong link. And I can just go and change this URL and that actually then makes sure that you know, some of the key heuristics obviously are you know, not triggered because this is a site that has the HTTPS login. I've got a real domain name. So that's going to be less suspicious to the heuristics. But let's go back and think about, well, what happens if I can't change my domain name and I can't use HTTPS? Obviously, there's going to be lots of sites that you know, are going to be detected by this that aren't committing phishing. So what I'm going to show you now is how to use the phishing filter to report, hey, this is not a phishing site. And by reporting it as the owner of the site, what that does is that moves me to kind of the front of the line and makes sure that the folks who are reviewing these reports go ahead and look at my site immediately to try to make sure that my site isn't returning that yellow address bar in the end user's experience. OK. Go ahead. The question was, if we view the IP address, why can't we view the certificate? You could view the certificate, but the certificate wouldn't match because the certificate is for johnandtalia.com, not for the IP address. So that's the reason that there's that error page. You could imagine that, you know, let's say that I wanted to set up a fake Bank of America site, and I put the Bank of America certificate on, you know, a little IP address server that I've got on, you know, a domain, you know, an IP address someplace, and you come to that server and you click on the certificate. It's obviously not the real Bank of America. So we want to make sure that the end user has the kind of information and understanding of what happened. Now, obviously, at the same time, we want to make sure that it's easy for folks to make sure that their sites work. So really following kind of the simple guidelines of having the address of the site match the address in the certificate, and making sure that the certificate is a valid certificate and that it was issued by a certificate authority that's part of the Windows, you know, kind of the default root certificates that are in Windows. That'll make sure that the end user never sees that experience for any of your SSL sites. Go ahead. So the question, sure. The question was, how do we deal with the fact that some of the warnings for security come up in the address bar, and some of them are coming up as the information bar underneath the address bar? So the general rule of thumb for most of these scenarios is that if the address bar changes color, that's a scenario where we really want the user to take notice and potentially to take some action, whether it's with a phishing site to, you know, go away, get away from the site, or if it's a suspicious site, you know, maybe that we want them to report it. With the information bar, because that's below the address bar and, you know, more subtle, that's really there to let the user know, hey, we've kind of blocked something to protect you by default, and you can continue browsing, and there shouldn't be a problem. And that's the general model between the two. That's a good point. Sometimes an end user ends up at a site and they see a prompt they've got to click on, or an information bar they've got to click on, and they're willing to go ahead and click on it in order to do their work. And we have to make sure that end users still have control over their system. The nice thing about the information bar is it takes the prompt out of the user's face. It used to be a yes or no, do you want to let this code from an unknown website take over your system or not? And and then another prompt half a second later. So by using the information bar, we provide the end user with the convenience of, hey, like their system's going to continue to work. They're going to be able to do most of what they need to do. And if they want to add a feature to their system, they can use it. They can do that through the information bar. So I'm going to actually continue here. Let's we're going through the site. We saw how when I changed the domain name to a real domain name, and when I switched over to the HTTPS page, how the suspicious site warning kind of went away naturally. So that's an easy best practice to use on your web server to make sure that the phishing filter doesn't ever register it. Now, obviously, it's a heuristically driven thing, but that's a great best practice. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and log in. To go off to the confirmation page for the sign-in. Well, in this case, you'll see that IE blocked some content because it was non-secure. Well, what that means is that the page, it's an HTTPS page, but in this case, it is including a script file from an HTTP server. So if it's an HTTPS page, that's a secure transaction with the end user, and no content that is passing around in the clear should be able to be interjected into that experience. In previous versions of IE, the end user got a dialog that said, do you want to allow mixed content in this experience? And most users just clicked yes or no, and they weren't quite sure what the right choice was. So to be safer by default, IE is going to block that non-secure content in this page. And I'll go ahead and enable it. And here you can see, hey, there's a prompt that's asking me for a credit card number. So now imagine that I was at a Starbucks and there was a guy who had taken over the router at the Starbucks and saw me doing a lot of transactions over HTTPS, but some HTTP content as well, and it was a well-known server. You can imagine that the HTTP content is something that the attacker could intercept and inject their own code into and get me to see a prompt that comes from them, not from the secure site. And the interesting thing is that the security research community is very, very driven to find vulnerabilities and exploits, not just in clients and browsers, but in web servers. So at some Black Hat a couple of years ago, I remember a guy who gave a presentation on small businesses, and he basically went and tried to do SQL injection against small business web servers. So you can imagine that if you're mixing content with HTTP and HTTPS, that there are folks in the security research community who are going to look for ways to abuse that feature and kind of attack the user with it. So what I was really trying to do was just pass along a string. So by using the script include file over HTTPS, just pointing at the resource on the same web server over HTTPS, now I don't get the warning, and I'm able to do a little document.write of the name that I'm passing in here. So now we've looked at a bunch of scenarios where IE kind of presented these warnings to the user about kind of the state of the site that they were visiting. And hey, there's a potential issue with this site. It might be suspicious. But I also want to show the way that a site can help a user know that they're having a more secure experience. So we're working with GeoTrust and VeriSign and a number of other certificate authorities and a number of other browsers on a new standard for high assurance SSL. So with high assurance SSL certificate, what this means is that for me to get this green address bar, that I have to have proven to a certificate authority that I'm a real business. So where it says identified by Microsoft, that actually says Microsoft Test Certificate Authority. Imagine that says identified by GeoTrust, identified by VeriSign. And then imagine, Woodgrove Bank, imagine that's Bank of America. Imagine that is, the real banking institution or one of your real e-commerce websites. So the end user now, when they see this, they can have confidence that they're actually at the real website and they're doing business with the real entity. If I open up this menu item, I can see here the name of the organization and exactly where it's at. So I can have more confidence. And one of the things that that Dean talked about yesterday in the keynote is that today, 47% of end users don't have confidence, as much confidence as they used to have to do business online. This experience will help kind of improve their experience, improve their confidence, and help them feel better about doing business online. Okay, I want to encourage folks, we're going to have time for questions here, but I want to encourage folks to go and do testing in the sandbox. We have a lot of folks from the IE team here to help. We have some compatibility documentation that we put together for all of these features. Actually, one thing I didn't show, that actually that toolkit was running all along. So some of the security features that were changing behavior of the site are going to register in this compatibility toolkit. And actually, for folks who are interested in the CSS changes, you can actually find CSS changes impacting being registered in here as well. Okay, the IE blog is a phenomenal resource, and we have a great interaction with our customers on the IE blogs. I really encourage folks to sign up for the IE blog as a feed, and then testing as ourselves on our own systems. The build is very stable and very easy to use on a daily basis. One of the things that is interesting is start talking not just to other folks in the development community about testing, but also with your customers. So we know that some of the major banking institutions still throw errors because of the user agent string in IE. They say, oh, we don't recognize IE version 7. So you can start talking to your customers and your extended community about testing with IE so that they understand what the impact will be to them as well. So that's all I have for today. I want to make sure that folks go and fill out the evaluations. That's a very important part of this event so that we can hear what you think and add our improvements for the next time around. With that, I want to encourage folks to come up and ask questions.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused about where you have decided to draw the line in terms of the responsibilities for security, because increasingly I feel like it's really reaching kind of outside of the experience with the internet and really much more into areas that should be the responsibility of the operating system. And with every version, and it's becoming more so with the IE7 builds, I just feel like it's increasingly being engineered to the lowest common denominator without the ability for people who do know about phishing, and well, actually phishing is not so much phishing, but really are aware of these issues, to actually have a usable product without having security bars pop up in front of them. So I guess the question is really about aren't some of these things really much more in the realm of what Windows Defender ought to be taking care of? And two, is there any kind of consideration or option being thought of for people who really are power users, or at least are savvy enough to recognize these kinds of things for themselves?
That's a great question. The question was, I think what I hear you saying is, as a power user, I don't want to have all of these warnings and information bars. I want to be able to go around the internet and use it the way I know how to, right? You're right that we've engineered Internet Explorer to be secure by default, secure for the lowest common denominator customer, so that the 600 million people online today don't all have to become web developers in order to use it safely. And then at the same time, one of the things that I didn't show, but that's really easy to show, is that all of these features are things that you can disable pretty easily. So I can come in here and, for example, turn off the phishing filter. And now, the next time I go to one of those sites that I think is, hey, it's showing me a suspicious warning, but I don't really think that that's a problem. Like I know the person who runs the site. You won't have that experience. There are easy ways to go and customize individual security settings in order to get that.
I guess, I'm sorry, but I guess the thing is that I'm really feeling more and more like those are things that start to, especially with the latest versions, break some of the functionality in there, and everything kind of turns pink if you turn off certain functions within there. I think phishing is really well implemented, and it's a very simple on-off, but it's really, for a lot of the other things, it's a collection of maybe 20 different settings that you have to go through on the options in there to really just kind of get back to the experience that we really had 2 years ago. So
there's definitely an impact, and I think the way I'd like to approach this is to look at the specific issues that you might have with the changes, the specific ways that it's impacting your experience, and say, hey, is there a simple change we can make to the website? I mean, like I showed here, it was pretty easy to change a domain name or change the way that I was calling a script source file, and hopefully those changes will actually be easy enough that we can make those and leave some of the secure defaults in place, both for the lowest common denominator users and for the power users as well.
You started to show the form where you can report a problem with the website, and barely touched on that, and I'm very curious about it a little bit more. If you can give a little bit more info as to that, how that works, because you said that you can report that you're the site owner. Well, what's to prevent somebody else to pretend that they're the site owner and that sort of thing? And who's going to be the one that really monitors and decides whether or not these reports are authentic? Because it's starting to feel like it's going to be a situation where a site is guilty until proven innocent, and that very well could happen if this isn't very well monitored and maintained.
So the anti-phishing feedback experience that we looked at, I did just barely touch on it, but there are some important protections in it. So for example, when I go to report a site as phishing, you can imagine that a malicious site would try to poison the web service and go in and report itself as not a phishing site. So if I want to submit this as a report, I'm actually going to have to, the first thing I have to do is confirm that I'm a real user. So that's part of the, part of the protection is making sure that the data is coming from a real end user, not from a bot. Another important protection, if it's somebody reporting their own website, that feedback form actually collects the information from the site owner so that the folks who are looking at the submission from the site owner can contact them. And again, that's really going to be for the purposes of saying, this is not a phishing website. So in general, the experience should be, simple. It should be transparent. It should be, it should be rapid. It should be something that, as a site owner, isn't a big deal to go through, and it should be very quick.
So that still doesn't answer the question of what's to prevent someone from posing as a site owner when they're not really. I mean, I could very easily have a disposable mobile phone that I give a phone number for, and you could call me, and I could say that, I'm the First Lady of the United States, and who's going to question that? Who is it on the end at Microsoft that's deciding whether or not they're getting a legitimate person making a legitimate complaint?
Sure. So the specifics of how the end user is going to, I'm sorry, the site owner is going to be contacted. I mean, obviously the site owner would have to really own the web server themselves. And really the point of the Microsoft grader who's going to decide if the site is phishing or not is going to be to look and see if the site is trying to mislead a third-party end user customer as to what it's doing. So if the site is a business, but it's not necessarily a very good one, right? Then the Microsoft grader is obviously not going to be able to list that as a phishing website. So it's really, right now, it's about protecting end users from phishing, which is collecting information in a misleading way in order to defraud the user. It's not necessarily to protect a user from a bad business that's just late sending you your stuff, or that claims to sell cell phones and has some fine print where they actually don't do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's going to keep people really busy.
Absolutely, absolutely. But one of the things that's good is that and I didn't mention this during the talk, is that we've already been able to protect end users 170,000 times from phishing sites. So end users ended up on a site, and IE detected it was and this is the IE7 beta, detected it was a phishing site, and we're able to navigate the end user away to that error page. And even as the data comes in, we're working with other partners like Cyota and other data providers to take that data and streamline it down, use heuristics within that pipeline to make sure that the kind of the worst attacks are being marked as phishing sites first.
Okay, and I hate to take up more of the time here. I know that other people have other questions, but this might be one too that's coming. It was mentioned in I believe it was in the keynote, that part of the security check is a matter of how long a website has been in business. They would be less trusted than somebody who's been in business longer. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So that was with regard to high assurance SSL, and the requirements for the high assurance SSL certificates haven't been finalized yet. But the point of the high assurance SSL standard is going to be to allow a certificate authority to certify effectively that a website belongs to a real business. So you can imagine that the certificate authority might have to have some kind of like history of a bank account that they've been able to look at for this business. You can imagine that the certificate authority might need to get a power of attorney from a public officer at the company that says, hey, Joe Smith in web development is allowed to apply for this high assurance SSL certificate on behalf of Woodgrove Bank. So you can imagine that there are some additional requirements that hopefully should be streamlined enough that real businesses can get these quickly, but at the same time helps raise the bar to the point where a fraudulent business is really just not even going to bother trying. Because if you raise the bar, the folks who are trying to commit fraud really, at a certain point, just won't be able to get beyond that. Go ahead.
I wanted to know what's the behavior of the security bus used in a control. For example, Visual Studio has a web page. I think that is an IE control. How does the info bus appear?
So if another host of the IE control, of the web object control, is using the IE7 version, most of the features actually require the host to opt in to using these features. So for example, the ActiveX opt-in, the blocking of and disabling of ActiveX controls by default, actually requires the host of the WebOC to be opted into using the Manage Add-ons security feature. And there's lots of documentation on the site that will help folks figure out how to opt in. It's very simple. It's writing a single registry key, and then you get those protections with the information bar.
And would the security permissions also be elevated for the control?
That's a good question. The security permissions, the protected mode IE, that's actually specific to the IE process. And running your own process in the equivalent of protected mode with those lower permissions actually requires that you kind of author your process to run with those low permissions. So that's not an IE feature. That's a Windows security feature for the permissions on your process.
So potentially there is a backdoor with, for example, HTML help or Visual Studio environment to kind of navigate the web. And
well, protected mode, like I said, we went and we looked at these experiences on the web that were very rich, and there was no impact to those experiences. And you can disable protected mode in IE if you need to, but yes, other hosts of the WebOC will not run in protected mode by default.
okay. Thanks.
Hi there. I actually have a toolbar for IE, and
Okay.
so now we're looking at IE7 and testing and such. I guess I probably already know the answer to this, but do we need to do a real deep regression, in your opinion, on both Vista and XP, or it's going to be sufficient to do one or the other? Or?
I think if you test, I would say you're going to find potentially more issues on Windows Vista because of protected mode in addition to the other features. But in general, I would recommend testing in both places because obviously running with administrator privileges on an XP system is going to have potentially different effects.
But most of the IE7 specific issues should be surfaced just in Vista, you think? Or?
That I would say that would probably be a superset of the issues you would see.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I probably have too many questions to ask right now, but
Okay. Well,
one of the things.
let's do 3 or so.
I'm not even doing that many.
Okay.
Essentially, you have a web service that is handling this, and you're going to have over 600 million users in the world pounding on this continuously. I don't see how you're going to be able to handle that type of flow. Not just that, but what are you doing with all where you're collecting a large list of essentially where everybody is visiting? How do you expect to handle that type of traffic, and what do you do upon failures and such?
So, the web service is definitely going to be able to handle a great deal of bandwidth. There's a couple of things that we're doing to make sure that the web servers the bandwidth is used wisely. So, for example, the first thing we have is a list of known good sites that get downloaded to the end user system. Kind of like the signature files for Windows Defender, there are going to be a list of thousands of known good sites that get downloaded onto the end user system, so that if I'm going to bankofamerica.com, for example, the phishing filter is going to say bankofamerica.com, the domain matches the domain in this allow list that's on my system, so I'm not going to need to go out and hit the web service for that. So the highly trafficked sites of the internet are already going to be known on the client, and the end user won't have to hit the web service. We're seeing that right now, folks who are running the IE7 beta aren't hitting the web service more than a couple of times a day.
Okay, my next question before I take off with this is you're verifying that these are particular businesses. Now that works real great in the U.S. when you're doing like Dun & Bradstreet reports and stuff like that. Once you get outside of the U.S., it becomes less and less easy to be able to verify whether it's a particular business or not. And you're kind of hampering this international commerce. And not just that, but there's a time frame on how long a particular company may be in existence before that URL or whatever is transferred to some other entity that could become a phishing site and so on. How are you going to be able to keep up with that?
Let me see if I understand the question. Are you asking about the high assurance SSL certificates? Are you talking about the green address bar here?
Yes.
Okay. So the certificate authorities are really the folks who are in the businesses of identifying these real businesses. And then in order to become a part of Windows or part of one of the other browsers that are able to show the high assurance SSL experience, the certificate authorities have to prove to the browsers that they've met the standard for vetting a business. If a certificate authority is trying to vet an international business, obviously the ways that you vet that business are going to be different than the ways you would vet the business in the United States. One of the things that's interesting is that through Latin America and through Europe, there's this idea of a Latin notaire, which is greater than what we think of as a notary in the United States and less than what we would think of as kind of a like a city hall. And this Latin notaire individual is going to be able to help identify businesses. And that's one of the ways that this might work internationally. And there's a lot of other ideas that we're discussing with the certificate authorities as we work on the standard. But you bring up a very good point that we haven't identified all of the exact criteria for vetting businesses internationally or in the United States yet.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
You mentioned that you're having some discussions with the big site vendors and with the certificate authorities. How about other browser vendors? If my brother uses Safari or Opera or Firefox, it'd be useful probably to have a set of standards for these security innovations that you're coming up with.
Sure.
That worked on the others.
So the high assurance SSL standard is actually something where we're working very closely with the other browsers because it's a new standard and it's something where we want to have some consistency between the experience across the different browsers. And some of the other experiences, like the error for the certificate, is something that is based on existing kind of standard criteria where we're warning the user if a site contains HTTP content in an HTTPS page. And we've changed the experience a little bit in IE7, where IE7 is more secure by default because it uses the information bar instead of the prompt. But one of the things we've found is that the other browsers have been very open to either adopting or working with us and having a discussion about the security changes we've made in IE7. So you could imagine that as these get better and as IE7 comes to market, that we'll continue to it won't just be the green address bar or the information bar for pop-ups, but you'll see other ways in which the experience starts to feel more.
So rather than using this as a product differentiator in the marketplace, you're going to try to encourage the others to do the same thing.
Well,
and if they come up with some good ideas, are you learning from them?
We're absolutely in discussions with them, and I mean, like I said, the high assurance SSL experience is kind of the first time where we showed them the green address bar as you see it here before a lot of folks at Microsoft had seen it. So they were able to give feedback and kind of help us kind of vet the idea as we were building it. And you can imagine that's going to be consistent going forward. That we'll continue to work with these other developers to develop ideas. I guess I can't give you yeah.
So we're an ASP that actually installs .NET CAS policy and then use a number of .NET Windows Forms controls in IE. Does that differ at all from what you've been talking about from the context of ActiveX controls? Because my understanding is that hosting model is a little bit different.
So if they're .NET controls that you're using in ASP on your web server, that should not.
No, not as ASP, as an ASP.NET. As an application service provider, we're putting policy on client machines and then using client-side .NET Windows Forms controls explicitly.
So I don't know precisely the impact to Windows Forms. I believe that's a separate security feature. That's something that we should follow up on after this in the Compat Lab.
How does the phishing filter distinguish intranet sites from outside?
I'm glad you asked. The phishing filter does not actually check for phishing on intranet sites, because intranet sites are obviously within kind of the network of the client, and therefore we can assume are managed by a domain administrator. Some of the other security features can also be controlled on a zone-by-zone basis. So for example, ActiveX opt-in applies in the internet zone, but does not apply in the intranet zone. So if you're a corporate administrator and you've got lots of ActiveX controls that you're using in your environment, ActiveX opt-in is great because your intranet sites will continue to work, but your end users will be safer and have more control when they're out on the internet.
Okay, so you're basically using the existing intranet.
That's right.
Zone.
Yeah. The one change is that in the beta 2 version, protected mode is going to, the intranet zone will run in protected mode by default. And one of the benefits of having the intranet zone in protected mode is that you'll be able to have maybe a tab for an intranet site next to a tab from an internet site, because protected mode really has to apply to an entire process. So to have a set of tabs that are from different security zones, they either have to be all in protected mode or all out of protected mode. So you should try that in your environment and decide what you like. We're very interested to hear the feedback from folks on what they think the right setting is for the intranet versus the internet.
Okay. And the other thing that was kind of touched on a little bit earlier was when requests come in through the phishing filter, are you collecting that data? And if so, who do you share it with, that kind of thing?
So if an end user reports a site as a phishing site,
just the checks against the database, the hits.
Got it. The checks against the database are can't be used to kind of correlate to an end user. So the database has been set up so that there's no way for Microsoft to correlate the IE client that issued the check to the site that that the end user was checking on. One of the other things that's important is that when IE calls urs.microsoft.com to do the check, it's doing it over HTTPS so that the domain that you're checking against isn't exposed in the clear, so that anybody who's sniffing on the wire can pick it up. And there's another cool feature is imagine I've got the phishing filter turned off. So it's actually in the off state right now. And if I go back to that phishing attack and go to the site, you can see here the phishing filter is off, but I can decide, what? Because maybe I don't want the phishing filter on all the time, but maybe I want to be able to check. Maybe I want to. We've protected the user here by taking them away from the phishing site. So the thing I was going to show you is that you can actually, on demand, you can check the site to see if it's a phishing site. So you can leave the phishing filter off all the time, but then use it on a per domain basis to check and see if there's any problems. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Thanks a lot.